How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
10 years ago, I went to the Arctic aboard a Russian icebreaker to learn about global warming. I'm back now to learn more about this vast region that serves as an early warning system for our planet. This time I'm touring Canada and Greenland with Students on Ice, an educational group. With more than 100 high schoolers from North America and beyond, we're exploring the Arctic and what it means for life in your town. We started in Ottawa and took a charter plane to a dirt landing strip in Resolute, a small village in Canada's Nunavut province. There we boarded a ship and for 2 weeks explored the Canadian Arctic and Greenland. On board were more than 100 high school students, scientists, educators, and musicians. The journey was organized by Students on Ice, a Canadian educational group. Founder Jeff Green has led more than 120 expeditions to the Arctic and Antarctic.
A lot of what we learn on Students on Ice is because of where we are. Clearly, we think the Arctic is the greatest classroom on Earth. And time and time again, it proves that that's true. When we started this program 18 years ago, we called it Students on Ice. And it's still a great name, but we could have easily called it Students on Oceans, because clearly we're on a ship and we're on an ocean most of the journey. We do get on ice, but we're on oceans more, and I love how we've had a big focus on the oceans, how critical the oceans are to life on Earth, and how we need to do a better job taking care of these oceans. We need to do a lot better to solidify that connection with the natural world. Clean air, clean water, clean earth for clean food, these have to be priorities, and decisions need to be made that reflect that. We like to say that the expedition is just the beginning. When we get to the final stop, it's not the end of the Students on Ice journey, it's just the beginning of what's to come. And that unfolds over weeks and months and years. Each year the Students on Ice program evolves and grows. I think it's maturing as we try new things and we learn more, and we're living in a changing world and a changing Arctic, so our program has to adapt and change with that. But here we are, and the program's come a long way, and it's evolved a lot since that first journey 17 years ago. The experiences are much more diverse. The students on board are much more diverse. And the platform of Students on Ice, I think, is offering a lot more. It's not just about the environment. It's also about history, about culture, about contemporary issues, about politics. It's become a real positive way of bringing youth together from around the world to learn from each other. It's bringing Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth together, sometimes for the first time. And that alone, I think, is a game changer, because when people get to know each other, when relationships are formed, when trust is built, that's when change can happen. On this journey, I think having students from Micronesia, from Malaysia, from China, India, have served to highlight how these issues we're learning about in the Arctic are really global issues, and they need global attention. And that means we need our youth, our global youth, getting to know each other, developing these relationships, having these discussions. I think that really bodes well for the future. With over 45 Inuit youth on board, it's so important that we tell the true broad history of the Arctic region. So we've been doing that on this journey more than ever before. And I think that's just a sign of not just the evolution of Students on Ice, but of our society's growing knowledge of the North.
Nancy Karatak Lindell is a former member of Canada's Parliament, where she represented the northern province of Nunavut. She's now president of an association of Inuit people in Canada, the United States, and Russia. We talked about how climate change is affecting Indigenous people who have extremely low carbon footprints.
The people who contributed least to global warming and climate change are suffering some of the first and worst consequences. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm not sure how to respond to that. We think obviously it's unfair that we are stewards of our land. We try very hard to protect everything on our lands and our waters, but it's impossible for us to control the pollution that comes into our areas. That has no barriers, there's no borders to that. So the most that we can do is ask people to understand the situation that we are in. We're very interested in alternative energy. We're operating with diesel power in our communities, both for fuel, heating our homes, and for electricity. And we don't want to destroy our land any more than we have to. So we're looking for ways to do new electricity. We're looking for ways to conserve energy. And that's where people in governments and different organizations can help. We can't do this alone. We're a very small number. We don't have a tax base. Most communities don't have a tax system. So we rely very heavily on governments and for public awareness. We do have a unified Inuit voice, but we need a lot of help with resources. Some communities are only 300 people to couple like 1,000. My community is 2,500 people. We don't have the numbers to do large projects like energy saving, solar systems, and all those different renewable resources. We need a lot of investment from the government, and we have infrastructure challenges that we just can't afford. So in light of the pollution coming from other places, we want to be understood that we need help in taking care of the changes that are being caused by that. I feel that the more we work together, the more we can solve some of those challenges and find ways to mitigate the changes. I feel that the more we come together, bringing our own knowledge, the scientific knowledge and then the knowledge of the people about the land and the sky, the birds, the mammals, and also that we're the ones that notice the differences. We might catch some fish that looks like something's different on it, a seal, geese, and maybe they're not laying enough eggs anymore. Those sort of changes, those are the things that we notice season to season. We see the rivers drying up, we see the lakes drying up, and we don't know why. It's definitely cause for concern for us because I don't know what those changes mean for us.
The warming in the Arctic is making oil and other natural resources more accessible up here. So what do you think about oil drilling in the Arctic?
So, as a modern day person as a modern day Inuk who wants to participate in the Canadian economy and global economy, I think that the concept of drilling for oil and gas is really good for jobs and opportunities and getting Nunavut involved with the world in general. But as a traditional Inuk, as someone who cares deeply about this beautiful land, I feel like without the proper precautions, it'll disturb the wildlife, it'll pollute the waters, it'll bring unruly people into the communities because there's been some reports of that with big development projects. So, as a modern Inuk and as someone who who wants to keep my traditions alive. I'm kind of on a mixed, yeah, I'm conflicted, yeah, exactly. So I really want the economy of Nunavut to move forward. I want us to be able to participate in the global market, you know? But at the same time, I want to make sure that this land is preserved.
Coming up next on Climate One, we dive into the science behind the melting Arctic and how international politics have changed since President Trump took office. Most Americans never travel to the Arctic, but what happens there impacts their life more than they realize. Brendan Kelly is an Arctic expert and former White House science advisor under President Obama. I asked him how the Arctic works and why it matters.
The Arctic is melting really, really fast. What does it mean for the young students who are with us here on Students on Ice?
Well, it means that they have a future that's going to require a lot of hard work that we should have already done, you know, in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and perhaps trying to figure out if we can in fact sequester greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. But even with that, you know, as you know, much of the warming we've already committed to because of the greenhouse gases we've already put in there. So there'll be a lot of adaptation that's going to happen in terms of everything from agriculture to moving villages in the Arctic and armoring shorelines elsewhere.
What happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. How is the melting Arctic related to wild winters in Georgia, fires and floods in Alberta, and droughts in California?
Well, you know, we increasingly are understanding how heat is moved around the planet through the ocean and the atmosphere. And there seems to be now pretty clear evidence that sea ice diminishing is having a ripple effect in those kind of mid-latitude regions you just described, and in particular having those extreme weather events happen. And the mechanism seems to be that as we take this lid, if you will, if you think of sea ice as a lid off of the Arctic Ocean, the ocean's in contact with the atmosphere, and heat is escaping from the Arctic Ocean into the Arctic atmosphere. And as that happens, the difference in air temperature in the upper atmosphere of the Arctic versus the atmosphere above the low latitudes, that difference is diminished. And that differential is really what drives the flow of air northward and ultimately spinning around the Earth in the jet stream. So you slow down this jet stream as a result of that decreased differential, and the jet stream begins to meander. You get these large waves in it. Sometimes those waves pull cold air and make the east coast of Canada and the United States very cold and snowy. There's some indication that they set up a blocking system that put California in drought for several years, changed flow patterns all over the mid-latitudes.
So the melting is messing with the melting is messing with the Earth's air conditioning.
Yeah, exactly. And we're understanding more and more that the Arctic really has this sort of service role, if you will, for the whole climate around the world.
You worked in the White House under President Obama on science policy. We have an administration now that seems to be anti-science. How worried are you about the future of science in the United States?
Well, I'm quite concerned about it because obviously that office has a big influence. I take some heart from the fact that, you know, there is a resilience in our science community. People are going to find ways to do the science they need to do. There are governors and mayors around the country that are saying, no, we're gonna keep marching forward on climate policy, including science. But it's going to have an impact and a lasting impact to, you know, pull back on the Paris Accords, to pull back on research, and yeah, I am quite concerned. This is not a time to be pulling back. We need to be leaning forward considerably more.
The United States and Canada share a long border and a friendly history, but the Canadian tar sands and the need to move to cleaner energy is presenting difficult challenges for the relationship. Bruce Heyman is a former investment banker who served as U.S. Ambassador to Canada under President Obama.
For the last 4 years, the Obama administration was a climate leader and Canada was advancing fossil fuels. Now the roles have reversed. So you've just left office. What do you make of this role reversal?
Oh, you know, it's in some ways incredibly surprising, especially when I arrived here the administration that was in charge, Prime Minister Harper, very much promoting, extensive growth in fossil fuels. Along comes the Trudeau government, which was, I think, more aligned with the United States at that time, the Obama administration, in terms of thinking about climate change and the balance. People shouldn't lose perspective, though. The Obama administration wasn't an either-or perspective, recognizing that we still use fossil fuels, that we fly planes, that we drive cars, that we energize some very large part of our economy on fossil fuels, that the preference was that we get as much of that from Canada as we could, at the same time making investments in alternatives that would eventually replace this carbon-heavy pollution set that we are so addicted to.
A lot of tensions between the U.S. and Russia right now. The warming in the Arctic is opening up resources to potential exploration, exploitation. Some people talk about a resource gold rush or grab in the Arctic and some tensions with Russia. How do you see that?
Well, I think that there's this vision of a potential resource grab. I will tell you that even though climate change is taking place, the reality is very harsh conditions, and I'm skeptical that it's economic today to go drilling as much as people are fearing. And so as a result of that, I think that the policies that have been established by the Canadian government and others to set aside pieces of land so that exploration wouldn't take place is going to be important. But it's setting the stage for future development, because today, even though people may have leaseholds up there, they're not spending the money to do it. It's just they have better alternatives right now.
Shell Oil pulled out after sinking $6 billion, and they took their money and went home.
Yeah.
Last question, what gives you hope, thinking about all these students who we're here with on this journey, what gives you hope that we're going to solve the climate so it doesn't really hurt them badly?
Well, first of all, you have to have advocacy, and to get advocacy, you have to have education. So we have now educated, and we're in the process of continuing to educate these young future leaders to get engaged and then to become advocates. I believe each of these young students will in one way, shape, or form or another be advocates for the North and be advocates for the Arctic as a result of this experience. You do this every year. You bring 100, 125, 200 people every single year, and before you know it, you have a lot of advocates out there who are promoting climate safety and promoting the region and protecting it.
When Justin Trudeau was elected Canada's Prime Minister in 2015, he appointed Catherine McKenna as the country's first Minister of Climate Change and the Environment. She's leading Canada's effort to balance its economy based on resource extraction and the need to develop cleaner energy and protect its natural heritage. One thing you did on this trip, you announced a large marine conservation area, and you gave credit to one of your predecessors under the Stephen Harper government, which was known as a fossil fuel friendly, really conservative, but yet you credited someone in the Harper government. Tell us that.
One of my predecessors, Jim Prentice, who unfortunately passed away in a plane crash, he was a real progressive conservative. Now that might seem weird to folks in the US, but we have those, maybe less now. But these are folks that, believe in the markets, they believe in, certain policies that we might have different views on, but he really believed in climate change. He really believed that we needed to take action. So he was the one who started work on the federal government side to protect Lancaster Sound. I thought it was just important. Look, I am happy to give credit to whomever. And it was, I don't think working to tackle climate change or just generally to tackle environmental issues should be a partisan issue. Everyone should want clean air, clean water, clean land. And so I'm happy to give him credit. We built on that, and we were able to make it much bigger working in partnership with Inuit. But he certainly got the ball rolling on the federal government side. So, I think it's a good thing to recognize that, because we have big issues, and if we spend all our time bickering, like as politicians, we're not going to get things done. Why does the Arctic matter to people in Ontario, California, around the other part of North America? Well, so maybe I'll give you a story. I was at COP22, I was in Morocco, and we hosted a reception, and we had the Minister of the Environment for the Marshall Islands, and he was talking about, in really moving terms, about how his homeland is literally going underwater. And I was with an Inuit leader, and his comment was, wow, so my homeland is melting and it's causing his to go underwater. And I think that's really what it's about. It's that everything is interconnected. And you know, when the ice goes here, it's going to cause sea waters to rise. We know that permafrost, you know, when you see that it's thawing, it also is releasing methane, which is, you know, really significant when you consider the potential impacts. And so, you know, the things that we're seeing floods, we're seeing droughts, we're seeing forest fires across Canada. Those are all related to, you know, what's happening here and what's happening around the world. So, you know, we all need to be working together. Sometimes you can get your little bubble and sort of say, well, it's not all that bad, or even worse, maybe what can I do? It's too big. But we need to take action. We don't really have a choice.
Coming up next on Climate One, our Arctic journey comes to an end.
So we've been traveling in the Arctic for a few days. You're about to go home. How are you feeling? What are you going to take back home with you?
Wow, that's a big question. I don't get the luxury most of the time to actually spend time in places that I'm working on. And so actually seeing the Arctic, seeing the land, the sea, the ice, the animals, and of course the people, it really hits home that what I'm doing is important. And the decisions that I make have a real impact. And you know, it just makes me more resolved than ever to work really hard on climate change to protect the Arctic. It's all connected, and we heard that from the scientists talking about the fish, the impact on the birds, you know, the impact on the animals, and ultimately people.
You can't always do what you want to do, and you got to be ready to adapt and be flexible. And I think some of those life lessons that get taught on a journey like this are as important as the more formal learning about science and history and whatnot. I think the students from all over the world are leaving this year's trip with a much better understanding of what reconciliation means, what some of the needed next steps are, and also why reconciliation is needed in the first place. That we're learning about the relocation of communities in the Arctic. We're learning about what residential schools meant and other failed government policies in the North. But also we're learning about how there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of great things happening. There's a lot of incredible leaders in the circumpolar Arctic and definitely in Canada. It's a lot for the students to absorb and digest. In the last 12 days, they've just been bombarded with so much information, so many experiences, sometimes quite emotional, but I think it's filling their hearts as well as their minds with experiences and information that will really guide them in different ways.
10 years after my first trip to the top of the world, I'm still struck by its awe-inspiring beauty. But the Arctic is much more than a pretty place. It's the central air conditioner for the Earth. And that air conditioner is sending warning signals that we need to hear and understand. The droughts in California and other severe weather events are connected to the disrupted Arctic and jet stream. As I heard many times on my journey, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic.